our focus was not, actually we started with the intent to cover like lot of areas to understand how building apps for say a small or early stage startup is similar or not similar to building an app for a large scale MNC. But then we realized that we have a limited amount of time and we cannot probably talk about all of the spectrum. So we had a limit. And then there, obviously we wanted to talk about more slight differences that we saw in how we should approach in these cases. It will be boring, like you can do this here and then there, like, and in soon we have to go deep, go for lunch, right? Yeah. Then, when we started thinking about differences between, say, a small-scale startup and large-scale MNC development process, there also we found it was not just a few. It was literally a huge topic covering a wide variety of subjects. So we kind of restricted ourselves a little bit further and to focus on specific areas. And Kavya will cover what we are going to specifically deep dive a little bit later. And yeah, that photo, I went to Paris last week. Yay! And we wanted to give some clarification in terms of how we kind of segmented companies. I still consider Uber as a early stage startup because we have to figure out a lot more things before it's complete. But I cannot just go with an assumption that it's a early stage startup and then build stuffs in that mode. So we have to give some distinction. So these are some rough guidelines you can go through, which we have taken up to kind of classify companies or products. Actually, if we take some, if you are a developer agency, how many of you are from developer agency? Yeah, obvious and others are there, right? So actually, these teams are involved in building multiple products. So you have to assume that the context in which you should look at it is more like what is the scope or amount of people, code and everything involved in one of those products. Because you will be working on 5 different products and you will definitely have a lot more engineers. And so that's the context. I don't want to go through that. It's just a matter of saying few Android devs and things like that. Please go through and then try to align. I know for a fact that there is a huge medium path between, mid path between these two, because we are talking about less than Android. That was not planned. 10 Android devs and then we are talking about more than 30 Android devs. So there is that big middle path which I'm sure a lot of the companies will fall in. So the reason why we kept that distinction was to allow the I didn't put those animations because I'm lazy. So we wanted you to take a call on various aspects to see where you are aligned. Whether you are building some new feature with a small task force in a large company, then you are probably that early stage startup. If you are actually in a startup, but you have a large team which is building some core functionality for that entire startup's business, then probably you should consider that part of the development as the larger. That's about setting the context. Let's move forward. And I guess Kavya will do that.
Hey everyone, it's great to be here today. So I'll just straight away go to the agenda of what we're going to cover with this talk. So as you can see, it's mostly we're looking at a developer point of view rather than the product or management, because that's a scope that's too large to get into. So there's technology choices, third-party choices with respect to third-party SDKs, developer tools, how to stay updated, testing strategies, and more of that rather than requirement specification or efforts that go into monetization and marketing, even though, of course, there are drastic differences between how an early stage startup would do that versus how a large MNC would. But we're not going to be able to cover all of that in this talk. So yeah, let's just dive straight in. So first is technology choices. So this is obviously a very umbrella term. So this is more to do with when you're a small early stage startup, you want there to be a safety net that, okay, everything that you use, so be it, okay, choosing to build with Gradle or the analytics platforms you use, all of that, so all of that has to be something that's got a very strong support behind it. So it's best to go for widely used popular choices so that you get that kind of support for your small team as well. Even if something breaks, you don't have to worry too much about it because the developer community is going to make sure that some update or the other is going to fix it, and then your product is safe. So conversely, for a large MNC, they would have multitude of use cases. So you're most likely going to be building custom frameworks or extending already available frameworks or completely new ones. So another point here would be maybe about training your team. So especially when you have a small team, you have the luxury of getting everyone on the same page. So what you generally do is take it slow, go for one technology at a time. Say, okay, you look at maximum impact. You prioritize based on maximum impact. So suppose you see, okay, you think that RxJava would really help your app. So you have developers in your team who learn that, and then you make sure that the whole team comes to the same page and implement it rather than overwhelming with too many new technologies, because that would deter the development cycle itself. While in large MNCs, you'd probably have a few group of people who become experts, and then maybe they write documentation so that the rest of the workforce is able to migrate to it easily over time. So yeah, so that's how you go about for technology choices. Now this is another question, of course, when you are starting to build a product. Okay, should you go for cross-platform or native? So at this point, when you're an early stage startup, it's best to look at the resources you already have rather than worrying about long-term what you want your product to do. So it's best to look at, okay, how can you prioritize shipping deliverables that work really well? So look at your own team, what expertise do they have, how can you combine that to build the best kind of product? So even if it's not a perfect fit, right? So because you might find a framework that probably works better, but no one in your team is familiar with it, that would take much longer to really push out. So especially when you're an early stage startup, you want to make that impact early, you want to be shipping fast. So in that sense, it's best to look at the resources you have rather than, but conversely, in an MNC, you would see, okay, it's very flexible, that you'll probably find different use cases, require different frameworks. So you might find an app that probably has completely different kind of code styles all around. And that's normal, and that's understandable because it's such a huge team, and they have the resources to make the kind of long-term investment to even train the workforce to go through with it. Right, so libraries and third-party SDKs. So for early stage startups, we'd even go so far to say that, okay, you have a feature that you want to implement, then look for libraries that probably tick most of your boxes, and then try to build your feature around the library itself rather than trying to do too much of customization, trying to build your own things, because those kind of things do waste a lot of time and resources, which is very precious when it comes to an early stage startup. At the same time, when in an MNCs, you'd see, okay, you'd be building your own libraries, But even if you are using third parties, it's best to maybe build a wrapper around them, maybe use adapter pattern or something of that sort to make it work for you. The whole time it's always, of course, best to always check for alternatives that could work better for you. Look out for things. So, developer tools. So again, even choices such as, okay, using Android Studio as IDE or the profiler, network profiler, memory profiler, all those things that make the developer's life easy, right? So Google provides these tools, and at the same time, it's best to automate the kind of tasks that you see your developers are doing a lot, write scripts for those, and is again that safety net of, okay, using tools that will work rather than trying to build your own. When it comes to MNCs, you're looking at is always fulfilled. And another good thing that MNCs can do is share these with the community, right? Take in and use these. So staying updated with libraries, you would probably use so many libraries, it might be hard to always keep track of, when to update what. So I think for startups, it's okay that you look at the change logs, look at the documentation, make sure, okay, would updating this library really provide that kind of impact that you're looking for, and only then do you really need to update. And when you do, of course, make sure that you're testing it thoroughly, because you don't want what's already there also to break. Maybe some was deprecated, or some minimum SDKs, all those things change, so it's best to make a note of that as well. And for MNCs, you'll see even a small change, because the code base is so large, even a small change can cause major ripples throughout. So that's why it's recommended to just update the dependencies at a regular cadence, and also, of course, ensure that required test coverage is there for regressions. Testing. Now, we know that for most early stage startups, testing is one of the hardest things to incorporate in your development cycle. But that's why it's okay to be testing it manually for most cases. But at the same time, you don't want your manual testers to go mad. So just make sure that your critical user flows are covered with a automated sanity test suite. And yeah, it's okay for the others to be tested manually. But conversely, for large MNCs, this obviously isn't a risk that can be taken. All kinds of use cases will have to have some thorough, elaborate test strategy that is covering all of it. Otherwise, yes, it's something that's a very high priority as compared to an early stage startup. So yeah, now Arun will talk about rolling out features.
Awesome. Hey, how many anti-patterns did you find till now that people told you not to do, and then we are recommending them here? So yes, I think before jumping into this, I actually wanted to give this clarification. I was supposed to do that in the hello slide. I missed it, so I'm doing this now. So when preparing the content for this session, one particular thing which we were very keen on was not to create an ideal world which probably we will not be able to follow, but go for something which is pragmatic, but slightly better than what is done on a regular basis. So that was not planned. So in that sense, now coming to the releases, I have seen this aspiration from many startups. In fact, many had even asked me how to implement that, which is how to create a weekly release cadence. It's actually good. Weekly release cadence gives us a lot of edge. In fact, I have captured that below. Ensure changes reach the users quickly. That actually happens. But weekly cadence is not really, it comes with a big cost. Every release has its own rollout period, and someone has to monitor it and see if there are issues. And then you are now relying on the user base to validate your build rather than yourself. So as a startup or as early stage startup, it's really important to build your, plan your releases around features where you test them thoroughly and then send them out, so that you don't worry about, worry too much or spend too much time for each and every rollout and then figuring out what went wrong where and things like that. Quite frankly, that cost is something better used in something else, because most of the time I have seen that developers make a release on Friday evening, and then definitely something breaks on Saturday, and then we have to fix something on Saturday evening when we are not in a shape to do that. And it just happens that, and then finally we say that the company is bad, right? And yes, MNCs, there are so many developers that you cannot really talk to everyone to figure out which is the best time to release. Go with a cycle. One of the key indicators when you actually become a large organization. If you are having a feature-based release, and then when you are moving to a release where it is completely isolated, where you just make a release every week or every 2 weeks, irrespective of what is there in the code, that's when you can actually, this one? Video. Yeah, so effectively, oh, it's back. I can use the podium to lean on. Oh. Yes, I share that feeling. Cool. Yeah, but ensure that you don't have your releases like once in a quarter, because that's, I think, understood. Feature flags. Ignoring whether you are a early stage startup or a big organization or a medium-sized startup, who here is using feature flags for development? Okay. Who here probably wants a brief about what is a feature flag? Okay. So, yeah, perfect. Feature flags are just like flags for the features, I guess, right? That you put a conditional coding in the entry of your part of your feature, and control that Boolean or whatever. It's generally, in case of if you are doing a flag, it should be Boolean, but generally it becomes a configuration where you say you provide 5 implementation for a feature, and then you kind of switch between them, and then there is also a case where the switch is off. So that's feature flag, and that allows you to control your application from backend, or probably from your, if you are using Firebase or something like that, then from your dashboards. That allows you to have a relatively lesser stress, because if something breaks in the wild, instead of immediately waking up and then building something and then shipping it to the Play Store and breaking something else in that process, you can just go ahead and then switch off that particular feature from your dashboard, and it actually allows you to like go back and fix it and then release it in the next version or something like that. Please do start using that. Not because it's fancy or anything like that. It gives you a much better developer, life. So you will actually find your job less traumatizing than before if you are using feature flags. You don't have to wake up, build something, and then send it out assuming it will work, because now you know that you have just switched off that feature, and then you will be able to build something better later and then release. I mean, it shouldn't be used too often. If it is used too often, then probably there is something wrong in the way the development is happening. When I say too often, you shouldn't require to switch off flags very often. Otherwise, yeah, it looks like my adapter was the problem. Okay. That's sad. Okay, I blame the organizers. Use external or internal framework for the large organizations. I'm sure, say Flipkart or Gojek or companies like that would definitely have the feature flag system tightly integrated with experimentation platform, which is tightly integrated with the analysis framework. It's required because then only you will be able to figure out whether whatever you released is making sense or not, because it's very, very difficult to literally test individual cases. Flipkart, Gojek, if you are not doing that, please, it's not like I am trying to call out, it's just a general, I have not worked in those companies, so. A/B testing, another critical thing for, say, large-scale MNC. But what I have seen recently is, I think many companies which are actually building their first 10 features are actually going into this A/B testing, because once again, you can actually literally figure out which one works better and things like that. Who uses A/B testing here? Right? I'm sure some of you are overdoing it. A/B testing is a time-consuming process, and it's required for important use cases, unless you are building it for a huge scale that even a small change can move needle in a big way, right? So our recommendation here is not don't do A/B testing, but do one A/B testing at a time. If your user base is limited, if your feature sets are limited, it's really not good to try 5 different implementations of a feature in parallel. So A/B testing has multiple options. I don't want to go into the detail. Assume at high level that there is a A/B testing for feature, no feature, and then feature 1, feature 2, and then for the same feature 1, implementation 1, feature 1 implementation 2, feature 1 implementation 3. So we can do, there are multiple variety of A/B we can do. Actually, they all have different names. A/B is a very common name that we use for everything, but they're all like AA testing, some OA testing, and something like that. It goes on. But the effective suggestion that we wanted to call out explicitly is that do it for your important features if you are in a startup. Do it for almost all the features if you are in a large organization, because that's also happening that when I have interacted with, I think in testing we were not able to cover this. I recently learned that in Facebook, automation testing is actually optional. So the developer can decide if you are building features. If you are building platforms, yes, you have to build them. But if you are a product engineer building features, Facebook has given that flexibility that you can actually test it if you want. If you are very confident, you can actually release it. But if it breaks, they'll kill you. It's a different thing. They didn't write that in the document. But that's actually the case. Like even for such a large organization, something which we call testing as like amazing, most important thing in the world, and we look down on anyone who is not writing unit test cases and things like that in interviews. But that's actually the recommendation from Facebook. There is no issue with that if you are having if you are putting conscious efforts to ensure that you are building things right. And it is very similar for A/B testing. I am sure Facebook will not have a similar recommendation for A/B testing, because A/B testing is like if someone just changes some feature and then if it literally brings down the likes and clicks, like the world will stop, right? Hey, we are near the end, actually. Takeaways. And these takeaways are completely different from what we talked about. So I want to give 30 seconds for you to just go through the takeaways, and then I'll brief some of these. Not all of them, some of these. Actually, we have a lot of time. Where is Anup? Yeah, Anup went home. looks like. Who is doing time check here? Can we do a small Q&A along? We can? Okay. We have time, but I want to check whether it's fine. Cool. Any concerns on this takeaway? Or any questions on this takeaway? We can actually, Kavya, let's do a Q&A. She didn't know this is happening now. Any queries around the takeaways? They are already fainted. Cool. The most important takeaway, whether you are in a small startup, or early stage startup, or in a large organization, have fun. The others are not important. Thanks. We do have time because we actually knew that we were touching upon some of the anti-patterns in our recommendation. So if you have any queries that we should discuss, we can discuss. We can do offline also, that's fine. Do we have a next speaker ready? Oh, come on. The hope the next speaker is also not looking at the card for, hey, I forgot, I have to give credits for this slide deck. They mentioned in their site that it is mandatory to give credits. I think it's slide go. They have beautiful slides. And Gojek is distributing t-shirts outside. Cool. If there are no questions, I think we can pass. Thank you so much. It was amazing. This level of silence I have never seen before. Hope you have a great day, and whoever is coming tomorrow, have some life. Bye.